So welcome today to our topic on labels and barcodes. Primarily working with labels in ARM. As I said, we'll have kind of two sections, two pieces to this. We're going to talk through kind of the built-in pre-built labels, I guess we'll call them, in ARM that already have defined structure. Throughout the years, people have requested, had use for certain types and certain content of them. And so some of those are built into ARM. More recently, we decided, well, it's kind of silly to have all this overhead for taking a request and having the developers have to create all that structure and put it into ARM when we could just hand over the reins to the user to build whatever they want. And so we have kind of the second portion today will be how to make your own. So let's start here just with the standard kind of templates that ARM offers. A few different kind of main purposes, I guess. We have different categories of labels in ARM that we'll see, trying to match up with the purpose or use case for them. The four main ones are your container, plot, seed packet, and harvest. And they a lot of times represent different entities. So of course your plot is you'll have a label for every experimental unit in your study, whereas a container is going to be related to your treatment. And of course, within the treatment, you can have multiple components. So you might need a label for the different components, or maybe you only need one label overall for the entire treatment itself, because they've already been mixed or whatever. So a lot of different combinations, of course, as there's just so many different types of research and structure that goes along with ARM. So we'll see that there's a fair number of options for different types of labels. Then, of course, within the content of the label, some of them can contain a barcode. Here, it's very, very small on the picture, but there is a little barcode there at the bottom. Some labels have a barcode on it, some do not. Also, subsamples. If you are making plot labels, I think especially you might find the need for subsamples. And so that's also another option that we will see in the list. So let's just jump in to ARM to see this list here. I've just got kind of a generic trial open from our tutorial list. So I've got a very short treatment list. So hopefully it's easier to visualize what we're looking at. But there is one treatment that has a couple different components, just for us to be able to explain the differences, demonstrate what those will give you. So the labeling functionality is in the print reports. Since you do typically, in the end, want to print out that label, that's kind of where we put it, even though it's not necessarily a report per se. Let me size this a little bit better. So in your list of available reports on the left of this print reports dialog, there is a section for labels. If I just click this little plus sign here, right next to the word labels, we'll expand and see the pretty extensive list of labels that we have. So there are these categories here. So with the lines trying to just show that it's kind of separating the list out. So this first section are a bunch of container labels. Then we have the plot labels underneath that. Just a few seed packet and some harvest labels as well. So again, the different categories for us. If I click on one of these, what we can do then on the right, of course, the report options here really are going to help us set up the label itself. So back here on the presentation, kind of the typical setup for labels would be a label sheet. So you'd have a page size with a bunch of different labels on the page, and thus we're basically kind of printing a report to land the content of those labels right on a sheet that will eventually be the labels that you can just peel off, right? So ARM, oops. So ARM won't necessarily be able to draw that label itself around there. We wouldn't need to print out a box around it, but you can imagine that there's kind of a box around each of these. That will be the reality of when you print this out to your label sheet itself. It'll be those sticky labels you can take off and put where you need. So that's the idea of the structure of the report that we have in ARM. And so these options are we want to, of course, line up the labels to make sure the content is perfect. So we have how many columns and how many rows are on that page, and then very specific the height and the width of those labels. So we can get it just right and even have the margins. That way, if I preview the report here using this tab, we can see the labels get generated, and hopefully then they would line up perfectly with what we're printing to. So you should be able to, whatever labels you're using, hopefully they have that description that you can match here in your options. There are some defaults. So over here to the right, there are some, Avery defaults. And if I click on one of these, you'll see just the options to the left change. So we're just saving, almost like a report set. If you've used the print reports before to save all of your options to replicate again and again, we're doing a similar idea, but very specific to a label because it's saving really the label size, if you will. So the formatting of a label, we have some defaults here. You can create your own. I've done that before, creating my own label. So basically, maybe start with the closest one or just hand type in what you have. Maybe it's 2x9 and the height, it's just a little bit taller. So maybe it's 2.7. I'm just going to make up numbers here. They probably won't make very much sense at all. See if that even sort of lines up. They're pretty big labels for my content, but whatever. Get things the way you have them for whatever label that you want, and then the button here to save new default will then just save those numbers so you're not typing it in again and again. So I could save that default. There's my new label that I have on my computer. Again, you're just saving the label size is really what we would be doing there. So if it's one that you commonly use, that's a way to just have that configuration saved. All right, let's take a look at some of these labels. So I'm going to utilize the report preview. This is kind of a handy way, just previewing right on this print reports dialog. Kind of handy for taking a look at the different labels then on the left. So this report preview shows whatever I have selected. So if I were to select a different label to the left, you'll see that preview just automatically refreshes to show me what this brief container spray volume label will give me. So nice workflow for just browsing to try to know, well, what label would work for me? I need certain details. Maybe I like some formatting better than others. Here we can see we're really emphasizing your treatment number, your application code, and the product amount. Those are big, they're bold, they're very loud. If I have big enough, tall enough labels that'll fit, maybe that's perfect. I really like being able to see that. Maybe there's more information or less information. Maybe I don't quite need all of that. So you can just kind of browse through the list there. You can see there's just a variety of different things that are possible. In general, with the container, you can see the pattern is one for every treatment that I have. Actually, I should say treatment component, because we can see treatment number 4 here, super stomp. Then there's a separate label for the second component of that treatment for that adjuvant. And that was one per treatment line. So the naming here, we just try to be as explanatory as we can of what's happening. It's a container. There's one label for each treatment line. So if I were to choose this container per one treatment, I would expect only to see the 4 instead. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the name can help a little bit, but I think just being able to preview is a much stronger way to determine what I need. Here it looks like we get one for every application code even. So treatment 2 is here twice, one for application A and application C. We'll just kind of click through a few of these going down to the plot section. There's just one per plot, pretty straightforward. Every plot has some of its treatment information. Looks like the number, the name, formulation, and rate. Some of these, you'll notice the name didn't really warn me ahead of time. Some of them have an extra prompt, so some special coding within there for a user-defined entry is what we call it. In this case, it's telling me the crop or the weed. So this will allow me to type whatever content I would want, and it will be then on each label. In this case, the intent is to put the crop or the weed that that we're targeting, I assume, or maybe with the plot here, it might be what we've planted, perhaps. So we'll just pick a crop. It is possible if you're making multiple labels per plot, which wouldn't ever make sense for the crop. But if needed, I could enter down, and each separate line that I make will then create a secondary label. Let's call it soybean 2 for whatever's worth that is. Then it will, well, I thought it would. This doesn't seem like it's really incorporated that information in here at all. Interesting. That was this one right here, right? Not sure why it's asking for information when it doesn't put it in the plot. Oh, there it is actually asking. Maybe it wasn't sized right for my. Let's try it one more time then. We'll go here and come back. Nope, not sure. Not sure what I'm doing. It might be an extra line. So one of the things that is probably important, and maybe I should have been a little more cognizant when I was picking these report options, is if the size of the label is smaller than what content we're trying to put on there, we're going to run into problems. It's just going to cut off. ARM is going to stick to the shape so that way each successive label isn't messed up further. So maybe I'll make these a little taller, see if we end up seeing anything more. There we go. Yep, so I was just cutting off that last line. So that's that custom, whatever I type in there is going to show up on the label. So some of these have something like that. It's also possible for the Subsamples. I was thinking some say subsamples, probably number of samples here. So if I go to this one, it's the same idea that there's this extra information we want. This one, it's telling us sample. So how many subsamples and what name? If I want to name the subsample, maybe I'm just going to abbreviate it subsample 1, subsample 2. Maybe I've got 4 of them. Oh, I'll go 5. So 5 different lines will create 5 different subsamples, and then whatever name I want to give them, that content will be used on the label itself. So now what happens for plot 101, I'm actually going to have 5 different labels, one for each of those subsamples because I created 5 different lines in that dialog. And then whatever I had typed into that line is what is used there for the sample name. And then as we look down at 102, the same thing. That's got 5 different subsamples, each with that same title that I gave it when I went to generate the label. Now it's asking that for the preview, the regular workflow here, if I were to go all the way through with something like that, is I would want to add that label once I have decided to use it. I would add it to my report set, just like a regular report function that we use. Although you really would probably never have more than one report here. Certainly, it wouldn't make sense to also print the treatments list, or a regular report wouldn't make sense in this workflow. You probably only really have the one set of labels, and then we would go ahead and proceed to next. Then it'll ask us once again, because it's actually going to go ahead and generate that full report, the labels for us. So each time we would generate our labels, we have this opportunity. So I'm going to do it slightly different just so we can see. And now I've got my regular print dialog, so I could send it to my printer. I could preview it on the screen first, just so we can see what we'll get. And once again, you can see the subsamples there. This time there's only 3 of them with a slightly different name. So that's kind of how to work with subsamples, or some of the other, a couple of those labels have some special prompting, but I think subsample is by far the most common. While we're here on the print dialog, of course, you would, if you're setting up, you want to make sure to load in your label sheet itself. One trick would be when you're first doing this, you could send it to just a regular sheet of paper to make sure you have everything set up correctly. First time working with the labels, it's kind of handy to do that. So that way you don't waste any real labels. You can just print it to a regular sheet of paper and then set that sheet of paper on top of your actual physical labels to see, does it line up? Or did I mess something up? Do I need to tweak my margins? Things like that. Since it is a little hard, like I said, with this preview, we can't, you can't visualize the boundaries of the real labels quite. Printing this out to just a regular sheet of paper and setting it on top kind of help you say, yeah, I think it's going to be right, or oh no, it might be off a little bit. I wonder if my margins aren't quite right. And then, of course, in that case, we would go to previous and we could tweak. I'm guessing those margins are probably the trickiest ones. Certainly the label height and width are really important. But I bet if there's subtle differences that cause things to get off just a little bit, it's probably the margins that would need to be adjusted to get things lined up just right. Okay, so that we looked at some of the plot. I guess let's finish previewing maybe some of the seed packet. So here with the seed packet, ARM is going to look at my treatment list to see, and in theory would only print a label for each treatment component that is a variety. That would represent a seed. So, of course, in this trial, I'm not working on a variety study. So ARM doesn't see anything that's a seed or a variety in my treatment list. So in theory, it would give me just a blank sheet. There's no treatments to select. So it is giving me an option. Should we just print this for every treatment instead? So I'm going to say yes, so we actually see something here. But that's the reason, is it would just try to filter out and only do the components and the treatments that actually are a variety or marked as a seed in the treatments editor. So here you can see the label, the terminology is variety, and then it gives me the treatment name. And then it's for each plot here for each treatment. Doesn't make a lot of sense given that it's a bunch of herbicides. And that's kind of why it prompted us in the first place. And moving down to harvest, there's harvest labels as well. And let's see if we have, and the last category here is some of these do have barcode. So kind of the last type here of something interesting. I kind of have to really zoom in to actually see this barcode's pretty small. But some labels can have a barcode on them. So if you have a scanner that you would then be able to, whatever you've labeled, just scan that barcode, and whatever you've connected to can then recognize what that entity is. So the way barcodes work, it really is just text that is converted into a barcode. So the question, of course, then with the label, what is the content of the barcode? What does it say? And so that is written right underneath here. So depending on what you want, and in this case here, in the name, it actually tells me. So the barcode has trial, treatment, and plot all built into the barcode. And sure enough, my trial ID is called 2020 tutorial. This label, the treatment number is treatment 3, and then the plot number is 101. So that's kind of what makes up the barcode. If I go to this other one, we won't have the treatment number on it. So we won't have the trial. We have just treatment and plot, a lot shorter barcode, just a 3, and 101 is all it needs to have there for each label. So that can be useful. And I think there's some other examples up here we probably just skipped over that have barcodes. So there's some plots that have a barcode as well. Oh, that has a sample and a barcode. We'll just make 2 samples to see that they have a barcode as well as subsamples in this example. The barcodes actually are a kind of font. So you can control, depending on your system, your barcode reader, it might have a particular types of barcodes or barcode font that it can read. And so you can change that. I guess I'll go here to my file menu and go to the, I think it's the page setup. Yep. So under page setup, there is fonts. So you've got your regular font for just everything in general on the report, but we have the special one for barcode font. So specific to kind of the formatting, the style of that barcode itself that's being created, you can control here. And again, probably, to a human, at least I can't tell the difference in any of them. It's all in the software. Whatever scanner you are using probably has a list of the fonts that it can recognize. Or maybe if you're having troubles after you've printed, getting it to scan, maybe you're just trying a different one that's in the list. Maybe you'll find out that your scanner just reads Codabar a little better, things like that. And you can also change the resolution. So again, maybe making that a little higher will make that a little nicer to come out in the end when you're printing to make that scan more reliable. And you could also change the size. So I'll try to make it pretty obnoxiously big. Let's go up to 14 from 8, just so we can see that it does change on our preview. That's the wrong one. Let's find one of these that's got a barcode and preview again. I bet I need to make this even bigger. About 14 is pretty obnoxious. Nope. It must be so big. It's messing up. Must be dropping things off even, but there it is. Much taller here on this last one because we've made that font size bigger. Before I get too far, I'm just going to change that back since it seems like maybe I made it a little too large. We'll go back to a reasonable size here. So a question here, kind of about the use of barcodes. I think the biggest thing would be if you have, the number one thing, of course, is having some sort of barcode scanner. Just physical, kind of a handheld thing, kind of like even in a supermarket that you see that scans barcodes. And in this case, it'd be a way then to identify whatever it is you've labeled, right? So here, we were in the harvest bag, so perhaps whatever we've harvested, we've put into a bag and then slapped a label of it came from this plot, right? Let's just stick with this example here. Of course, now we've lost our barcode somehow. We'll just stick with one of these it's printing something at least. We've labeled this plot number. We put everything that we've harvested into this bag that matches here. We could then use like a software. We could actually even use ARM if we wanted to. There's a function for taking data. And the idea would be instead of manually finding the trial, finding the plot number, clicking into the cell, and then, okay, here's the weight, or here's the number of fruit or whatever, doing that actual assessment. I could instead use that software to just scan the label, and it will read in, oh, it's this trial, it's this plot, etc. And now you've immediately located that plot, if you will. Then you could type in, oh, yep, there's 12 tomatoes in this bag that we took, or whatever it is that you've done. So real quickly, that workflow just in ARM, so I kind of have something to show at least. Let's just clear out this data here. There is a read from scanner in the tools menu if you wanted to use ARM for this workflow. And so you would just tell ARM what to expect in the barcode. So in our case, we had treatment and plot number. And I don't have one physically with me, but I would plug it into my computer. And then when I pull the trigger on the barcode, it will read the barcode in here. And so it would be just kind of like what we saw there, treatment 3, plot 101. I'm typing it in because I'm cheating, but that would be what would happen. Oh, I need to put in my delimiter. So if maybe there's a comma between those, it'll understand what is what. There we go. So I scan that barcode. It's labeled, it's identified what that is. So now ARM will be able to put in my data into the right spot. So all I have to do is take my assessment, what is the weight here of this bag of my yield or whatever. And then I'll just move to the next one and let's scan another barcode. It doesn't have to be in order. They probably don't get in order at all. So I'll just skip down to plot 201. It'll know exactly where that is, just pushing that button, and now I can record my value and move along. So presumably there'd be some sort of software that is in your system. I'm using a yield example. That's kind of the first thing off the top of my head, especially because ARM is here. But you might have other systems as well. And now it's just wanting me to confirm where should that data go. It's column number 1 is what I was taking the data for. And it looks like I wasn't paying attention to my treatment assignment. So it's warning me that, wait a minute, it's scanned as treatment number, when I scanned it, it said treatment number 2 was 201. Obviously, I just wasn't paying attention. So there, it brought in the data. So that would be kind of the requirement, is some sort of some sort of software along the way. And maybe it would be when you're making an application, might be useful to scan in the some treatment information, things like that could be as well. I don't see tons of barcodes here, so maybe that's not done very often, but the plots, the plots too. I must have really messed up that font there because it's not printing for everything, but so hopefully that's helpful. I kind of suspect if you've never used barcodes, and maybe there's a chance you really don't have a workflow that really would need them, but maybe not. So that'd be the reason why it would matter. All right, back here. So we kind of covered the standard labels here, I believe. Didn't forget to mention that regular paper example to try not to waste those label sheets is a good way to do it, especially at least that first time through. One more topic here with the standard ones, just maybe a slightly different type of label that you could generate. So the last one is that one-page sheet. There are labels that are called continuous or roll labels. I've got a picture of an example here that instead of having that large document style, it's actually just prints one label at a time. And of course, obviously it'll do 20, 50 all in a row. It'll just go boom, 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 boom. But it's just fundamentally different in the construction of that label. So the key, we can still do this same idea with generating labels. We just have to tweak a little bit the format of the quote unquote report that we're generating. So in ARM, to make that work, we really just have one column and one row per page. And basically, we're going to treat this one label as the entire page. And then we'll just have a document that has a lot of pages to it. And that's really a way to make ARM work with these printer types. So you would still specify your height and your width like always. Margins maybe would be 0. It might depend on that formatting of that label. But that's the biggest thing, is really pretend that the page size is one label. And just real quick, I'll go into ARM because you want to do under File, we would want to do the print setup to change the size of your page. And sometimes that might be done automatically because here in the print setup, now this uses whatever settings are related to your specific printer. So as you connect your roll, your continuous printer, it might already have that as its setting, but you want to kind of just double check. Now, for me, I'm connected just to my office printer here. I don't have that type of printer, so it's not going to be set that way. It's a very generic office style instead. And what you would see here is going to depend on the type of printer you have, the software that it includes, the settings that printer has. So this will probably maybe look way different for you, but the key would be to go somewhere in these options to find the paper size and change it to be the size of a label. And again, I don't have a lot of options, but some of these would be depending on what it is I'm printing to. That's really the steps if you're using one of those labels instead of an entire label sheet. So really just those two steps. You want to make the page the size of one label, and then make sure the paper size is also the size of one label. So that's what ARM offers for standard labels. Like I said at the beginning, hard-coded, the programmers have to construct the code behind the scenes to put those pieces together the way they were requested. And that worked for some years. They're general enough. We built up enough of them to be good enough for a while, but it got to the point where more people were using them, and we just asked ourselves, well, it's silly when someone wants it. Of course, it's the time that they need it. We can't just spin one up immediately. It takes time. It'd be a whole lot easier if we just handed the keys over for anyone to make their own label. And so that is the custom labels functionality in ARM. It might sound a little intimidating. It's actually really, really easy to make these. The caveat is, and I went through this when we first added this function, and I sat down to, okay, how am I going to make this documentation on how to do it in ARM? It sounds kind of tough the first when you listen to someone explain it. In our office, our CEO, Kyle, he's had research experience, so he's done this before. He's made labels, so he's running through it quick. He's like, oh, it's really easy. You do this, this, and that. And I'm like, that sounds anything but easy. But the first time you do it yourself, it actually is. It's like, oh, actually, okay, this really is pretty straightforward. So I'll try to go through it now, but if I make it sound complicated, I would just say maybe give it a spin once yourself just to see, because that was at least my experience. Is it sounded terrible, but then I had to try it because I had to be able to explain this to others, and then when I actually did it, it really was like, oh well, actually it's not really nearly that bad. So. So on the whole, really what we're doing in ARM is simply exporting the data that would be displayed on the label. We export that to just a CSV file for whatever label software for you to use. So the ARM side of things, very straightforward. We're actually just making a file. We're just exporting a file to use later on. The file itself, kind of like we saw in our list of built-in labels, depending on what type of label you want to generate, will have a slightly different format, a slightly different set of information to export. So that's these options here. When you go to create the file, you've got these different types, just depending on what you're trying to generate, right? So treatment line is, of course, just for every component in your treatment list, I want a label for each component. Conversely, treatment is just one label for every treatment number. And if I have a treatment that has multiple components to it, that information just gets squished together, concatenated on the label. There's the multi-line treatment. We saw one of those examples earlier where every treatment and every application code, so every time that that treatment needs to be applied, you end up with that many different combinations, that many labels. So treatment times application code, you end up with quite a few labels there for each combination of those. Then there's the plot labels. Of course, we've seen those examples, just one label for every plot. And then the last one is assessment. So for each treatment number that you have, we'll actually pop open the assessment editor and you can pick assessment header fields. So listing out the description for an assessment that you're about to do, and then you'll have one for each treatment number. So let's, I guess before I jump in, just to show that we do have a kind of a handout, which I'll include when we email out the recording, a document here, a PDF document that goes through these steps. I'll go kind of quick for today, just so we can see the entire workflow. But it is nice just to have that handy. I usually have it on my screen whenever I'm going through it as well, just to make sure I follow each step, essentially. So that's real handy to print out even, or at least have on your screen when you're doing it. I'll make sure to send that out. So back to ARM, a few different places you can get to the custom labels. I'm going to start where we were before with the print reports and all of the labels. The very first option at the top called raw data labels. That's the way for us to generate this raw CSV file with all the information. It's also possible, before I proceed, a few other spots you can get to that. There's the little shortcut label button right next to the print reports, actually, for the raw data labels. And this takes us to the data export options. So you can get there also by file, export study, and there's a raw data labels option. No matter which way you go, you get to the same options here for just kind of two things you need to do. You specify the delimiter. That's just how a CSV is constructed, what value should make the columns. Then we have the label format that we want to generate. And so that's that list I just went over. What entity are we trying to label? One for every treatment line, one for every treatment, etc. I think for today, I'm just going to generate plot labels. If I did want to make multiple, so maybe I have a few different types of labels I want to make, you'll notice that I can select more than one. And there's an option so you can have separate files for each format or put them all into one. And depending on your label software, maybe it can handle everything in one file. Maybe it prefers multiple, just kind of up to what you'll be using. But I'll keep it simple. Let's just do some plot labels. Once I make that, I'll just open the file location. So what's going to happen is it's just going to create, I'll just throw it on my desktop here. It's going to create a CSV file. In this case, we've got our trial ID and then just a short little identifier for the type of label I've chosen. That way, if I make multiple, it'll be kind of clear which one's which. So I'm making the plot labels for my 2020 tutorial trial. And I'm just throwing them on my desktop. Probably would make sense to save it in a in an accessible location, maybe right where your trial is at. So from ARM's standpoint, that's all we need, right? That's the end of it. We've just pushed out the information, and that can be picked up by some label software. I don't have any fancy label software, but I do have Microsoft Word. And actually, Word does a pretty good job of working with labels. So that's the workflow that I've documented and shown in our documentation. Pretty easy to set up. So I'll kind of go through that now. The key being here, we want to go to the Mailings tab. And of course, some of these might vary a little bit with your version of Word, but I think in general the idea is that we're really doing a mail, right? We're doing the mail merge. And in this mail merge, different types of things that you can be using. That's there's a whole labels workflow here. What I found to be the easiest to follow actually is the step-by-step mail merge wizard. Kind of foolproofs it for me a little bit because over here on the side, then it has the step-by-step. So I can't get off track. I can't get ahead of myself. I'll just follow the steps that Word tells me to do. That keeps me going. So it'll just ask me questions and walk me through it. So first question, of course, is what am I creating? I'm creating labels today. So next is how do I want to start? So I have a kickout option here for the label options. This is how I can tell Word what size of label I am using. They've got a lot of options built in, all sorts of different label vendors here, they call them, so you can find, hopefully you can find your exact one. I'll just find an Avery here, maybe ID label that might work. Maybe a sticker that looks fine. But obviously just every label, hopefully just by every label you can actually find in this list. Otherwise you can create your own, kind of like what we did in ARM. So that is going to set up the document to be the size of our labels. Actually, I'm going to turn on the option to view grid lines so you can actually kind of see what we're working on then. It's set up the document to be exactly what my label should be. Then the next step is the recipient list, which in our case is the labels themselves. What entity are we doing? So in this case, it's our plots. So each plot is our recipient that we're generating a label for. So I want to use an existing list because that's the list that ARM generated for me. So now I can browse out to that file that I created in ARM. Again, I just threw that on my desktop so it'd be easy to find. So it's going to connect to that CSV file. It's going to ask me for that delimiter. So that was the option when we generated, just to how does it make the columns? I had chosen column here. That way it can actually read the file. I'll expand this a little bit. It was able to read and understand that file. So these are the different columns that are in that CSV that were created, and you can see I've got all sorts of information about each of my plots, right? Plot number would be the primary one. So that's what is in my list. If I wanted to change the order of my labels, I can do that here. So there's some sorting. If I needed to filter, if I only wanted to print out certain ones, I can do some manipulation of that list here. I can even just manually turn some of them off for whatever reason. So that would be the interface just to control what gets brought in, what actually is going to be utilized when we make the labels. Next step is arranging my labels. So here now I can actually do the custom creation. I just create whatever I want in this first label. So I can type in my prompt. So that's just the hard-coded trial. And then if I do a space, what I would like to have next is the actual trial ID. Well, how do I insert a value from my label? That I can do with, here we go, my insert merge field. So if I click this drop down, this is all of the different columns from that CSV. So here's my trial ID. That was that first column, technically the second column there. So it just inserts a little placeholder. And then maybe I'll want my plot number next. I could insert that as well. That's P-N-O. It's a little weird unless, if you're, kind of got a programming background, it kind of makes sense. You're putting this little variable here, but it's a little hard to fully visualize what we're getting. So what we can do is preview the results up here on the top. It'll help us to kind of understand what we're actually getting ourselves into. So if I click on that preview, now it actually puts in, instead of just a little placeholder, it actually shows me what it would look like for plot 101. And I can just turn that off. So this little, when I click into it, it kind of turns gray. If I wanted to change the formatting, I can do it with, just grabbing that entire section, and it'll treat that formatting just, maybe I want to increase the size of that so you can change that content. And then when we preview, you'll see that that text that gets put in there has the formatting I just gave that little holder. Now, right now, I'm only seeing this first plot. There's a button to do that for all of them. I think it's update labels here. Yep. So one kind of quirky thing that I found with Word, once you make a change to this first one, you have to then decide if you want it to propagate to all of the other labels. So that was this update labels button I pushed, and now that change made it to all of them. So now when I preview, I'll actually get a little better sense of what I'm actually getting myself into with that page here of all of the different plots. And I can just keep making tweaks. I could keep adding things if I want. So maybe I want the treatment and the treatment number just right after that. Maybe I want it tabbed over. Oops. Maybe let's put it on the right side or something, whatever it is. Then we can just go back to my mailings. Here we go. And I have to remember to propagate. So update the other labels, and then I can preview to see how it's going to start to look. So that's kind of the workflow for creating the label. And now you get that creative part. Now you can choose what information is put here, how is it arranged, how is it formatted, things like that. Now this list, probably you're starting to wonder, okay, trial ID, I could kind of figure that out, but some of these, I don't know what these even mean. So that was the other document here I had listed, and it's also linked in the handout. So you'll be able to get to this later, but we do have kind of the lookup here for each type of label that you generate. the field. So that's what you'll see in Word because that's our column heading, that's the column with the information, and then we'll tell you actually what it is. Some of them, like this is formulation value. So it's actually 3 different fields all squished together. Some of them are like the product amount to measure. So it's not just a value in the trial, but it's actually something that normally you only see on the spray seeding plan, for example. So variety of different things, depending on what output you have, there's obviously different types of information that can be generated. So this is the cheat sheet for you to just translate to know when I'm trying to insert information. Let me go back to Word. When I'm trying to insert information to know what I have available, trying to understand what this list means. That's kind of how you can translate between those two. Okay, real quick, try to wrap this up. Let's just say this is good enough for me for my label. I can go back to this mail merge. We have arranged our labels the way we want. So let's go down to the bottom and go step 5 is preview our labels. Kind of already done that, but we can kind of finalize it here to say, yep, this is what I want it to look like. And then we can complete the merge. So 2 options, 2 ways to proceed here. If this is perfect, exactly what I want, I can print. So if I have my label printer all set up, I can just print these labels. If I get rid of the grid lines, you'll know it's not going to actually print those grid lines. It'll be just like this instead, but this kind of helps us to see the label output. Otherwise, I can edit the individual labels. And I kind of like this. So when I click on this option, it's going to generate a separate Word document for me that doesn't have any of that mess. There's no linkage here. It's just the words. There's nothing connected. It's just a document formatted exactly, ready to go for the specific trial's labels. And now I can connect my printer, make sure it's all good. It's this nice, very simple separation of that previous process of setting up the label. Here is my label. Nothing else hidden, just the content that I wanted. And the other reason that's nice that I like is because this was a separate file. So a separate window that I'll just minimize right now. This first document I created can be my template. So I can use this document again for the next trial if I wish. So I would want to save this document as my plot labels template. Of course, Word likes to make this complicated instead of just letting me throw it onto my desktop. So if I save that as kind of a separate Word document, then next trial that I want to make plot labels, I can open this document again, come to my mailings, and just edit the recipient list. Oops, excuse me, not edit, but select a new list. And so now I could go and find a different CSV, one when I go into ARM, create a separate one for a different trial. I can load in that list and it won't start the whole process over because I have all of this structure. It's just going to change the content of the labels to be what's from that file. Obviously, in this case, I didn't create another one. So it looks identical, but that would be the template. So you only have to do this work once to actually set up your label. And then it's just a few clicks to generate a new CSV in ARM and then connect it to your Word document to generate a new set of labels. So, like I said before, might have sounded a little complicated. I'm also going really fast. But I would recommend just giving it a try. It surprised me when I did it the first time, of being pretty intuitive actually once you just kind of make yourself follow the steps. But of course, if you're trying it out and have any troubles, as always, feel free to reach out to us, um, and we can kind of help you set you straight, try to get your labels up and running. Once you get it through the first time, like I said, then it's good because you have that structure and it's just a couple of clicks to connect to a new file. So the workflow is pretty nice once you get over that initial hurdle of setting it up, which is a pretty standard thing, I guess, with software. Once you do it once, then the automation is there. But anyway, I'm over time here, so want to thank everyone for joining today. This is our last webinar for this season. At least here in the Northern Hemisphere, things are really picking up, so hard to get people to burn a whole hour listening to me ramble in the summertime. So we'll pick back up in the fall. So thanks again, everyone.